The first time Elara saw Castle Alaric, she didn't think home or hope. She thought of cold stone that had forgotten the sun and of doors that never opened for girls like her. Still, she walked closer because hunger can make courage out of anything, especially when you've already run out of gentle choices. The forest around the castle held its breath. Pine needles softened her steps, but the air itself felt sharp, like winter hiding inside summer. Moonlight pooled on the road in pale ribbons, and the towers rose above her like watchful shadows. Elara tightened her shawl around her shoulders, not to fight the cold, but to keep her hands from shaking. She was poor, yes, but not small inside. That was the part nobody ever saw. In her pocket was a folded note with a seal she didn't recognize, dark wax pressed into the shape of a crown. It had arrived that morning, slipped under the door of her rented attic room while she slept. No name, no explanation, only one line written in careful ink. Come to the castle before the third bell. Bring nothing but your honesty. Alara had laughed at first, the kind of laugh that breaks in the middle because it wants to be crying instead. People didn't invite her anywhere. People didn't even look at her unless she was sweeping their steps or selling wilted herbs at the market. And yet the note had felt strangely warm in her hand, as if it had been written near a fire. She reached the outer gate just as the wind changed. A pair of iron doors stood closed, covered in twisting vines that were alive enough to shiver when she exhaled. For a long moment, nothing happened. Alara stared up at the metal, at the hinges blackened with age, and she almost turned back. Then the gate opened by itself, slow, careful, like it didn't want to frighten her. A lantern flared somewhere inside the courtyard. Its light was not bright, but it was steady, and the flame didn't flicker in the wind. Elara stepped through, each footfall echoing against stone that seemed too old to remember kindness. The courtyard smelled of rain, old roses, and something softer, like warm tea left on a windowsill. That scent made her throat tighten. It reminded her of her mother's hands, of evenings when they still had sugar to spare. "Who are you?" she whispered, not because she expected an answer, but because silence in a place like this could swallow you. A figure appeared near the entrance hall, so quiet she thought he had been standing there all along. He was tall, draped in a dark coat that fell in clean lines. His hair was black, his face pale in the lantern glow, and his eyes were the kind people wrote songs about when they were afraid to say what they really meant. Not red, not monstrous, not glowing with threat, just old. And tired, like a king who had worn his crown alone for too long. Alara's pulse leapt. Every story she'd ever heard pushed itself into her mind. Vampires and curses, missing travelers, kingdoms ruled by night. Her legs went weak, but she forced her chin up. If fear was all she had, she would hold it like a shield. "You shouldn't be here," the man said. His voice was calm, gentle in a way that didn't match the cold stone around him. It was the voice of someone who had learned to speak softly so the world wouldn't flinch. Elara swallowed. "Then why did you call me?" His gaze dropped to her pocket, to the edge of wax seal peeking out. He looked away quickly, like seeing it hurt. A strange reaction for a king, and stranger still for a creature people claimed had no heart. "I didn't," he answered, and the honesty in it made her stomach twist. Behind him, the castle doors stood open, and warm air drifted out in a quiet invitation. Elara caught the faint sound of a clock, a slow rhythm like a heartbeat trying to remember its job. As she stayed where she was, "Are you King Alaric?" A long pause. The lantern's flame steadied as if the air itself listened. "Oh, yes," he said at last, "and I'm sorry." Sorry." That single word didn't belong in the mouth of a vampire king. It didn't belong here at all. Alara's fingers curled around the note in her pocket. Sorry for what? Alaric took one step toward her, then stopped, like there was an invisible line he refused to cross. His hands stayed open at his sides, empty and visible. That detail struck Elara harder than any threat would have. He was showing her silently that he meant no harm. His eyes flicked to her shoes, thin soles worn through at the heel, then to her hands, ink stains and small cuts from work, then to her face, trying so hard to look brave that it almost broke him. You've been carrying more than you should, he murmured, as if saying it too loudly would be disrespectful. And someone used that. Elara's breath caught. What are you talking about? From deep inside the castle came the sound of a bell, low and distant, counting the hour. One, then a pause, then two. Alaric's jaw tightened, not with anger but with fear. Fear he was trying to hide for her sake. Elara, he said, and her name in his voice felt impossible. He shouldn't know it. She hadn't spoken it. The note hadn't been signed. No one here should know anything about her. Her skin prickled. How do you know my name? His gaze lifted to meet hers, and for the first time his composure cracked. Something raw moved behind his eyes, regret, grief, and a kind of tenderness that didn't make sense. I know it, he said quietly, because it was written in the old vow, the one my family swore the night they stole a girl from her future. Elara went very still. The courtyard seemed to narrow, the air heavy with meaning. The bell inside the castle began to toll again, starting the third count. And as the third bell began to ring, Alaric's voice dropped to a whisper, like he was confessing to the only person who might still be able to save him. You didn't come here by chance, he said. You were brought here to unlock a secret that could destroy my throne or finally free it. Elara's hand trembled in her pocket as the wax seal pressed into her palm, suddenly hot like a living thing. Then the castle door behind Alaric slowly started to close on its own, as if the night had decided it was time to keep her inside. The door didn't slam. It closed the way a decision closes, quietly, firmly, leaving no space for argument. Elara spun toward the gate, but the iron vines had already curled tighter, stitching the opening shut as if the castle itself had fingers. A small, panicked sound rose in her throat, and she crushed it down before it could become a plea. She had begged enough in her life. Begging never fed you, it never saved you. When she turned back, King Alaric was still standing at a respectful distance, his hands open, his posture careful. He looked like a man trying to prove he was safe while believing he didn't deserve to be. I won't keep you here, he said, and the steadiness in his voice was almost convincing. Almost, but the castle will if it thinks you're in danger outside. That's not comforting, Elara replied, surprised by the sharpness of her own words. A flicker crossed his face, something like relief, as if her anger meant she still had strength, and strength meant she might survive whatever was coming. Oh, you're right, he said softly. It is. He stepped aside and motioned toward the entrance hall. Warm air drifted out again, carrying the scent of chamomile and wood smoke, so gentle it felt like an apology. It didn't match the stories people told about him. Monsters didn't brew calming tea. Monsters didn't worry about the comfort of a stranger. Elara hesitated at the threshold, listening. The castle was not silent. It had a living quiet, distant ticking, faint creaks, the hush of curtains settling, like an old house trying to hold its grief without disturbing anyone. What secret? She asked, keeping her voice steady. What did you mean, stole a girl from her future? Alaric's gaze drifted to a high stained glass window above the hall. Moonlight pooled in its colors, painting his face in pale blues and bruised purples. For a moment, he looked carved from sorrow. My father made a bargain, he said, each word measured like stepping across thin ice. A bargain to protect the kingdom from famine and war. It worked. The land healed. The people lived. Elara's stomach tightened, and the price. Alaric's throat moved as he swallowed. A bloodline, a promise, a child taken from an ordinary life and bound to this castle so the gift could be renewed when the time came. Elara's fingers went cold. You're saying a child was kidnapped. His eyes shut for a heartbeat. When he opened them, they shone with something that looked too human to belong to a vampire king. Yes, he said, and the worst part is my family convinced themselves it was holy, necessary, noble. Alara's chest rose and fell too fast. She tried to steady her breath, but the truth was sliding into her like winter. She thought of the note, the wax seal, the way the gate opened for her like it had been waiting. She whispered, "Why me?" Alaric looked at her as if the answer hurt him. Because the vow is waking up again, he said, and whoever wrote that note is trying to finish what my father started. The hall seemed to stretch longer as she stepped inside. The floor was polished dark stone, reflecting the lanterns in soft, golden puddles. Portraits lined the walls, stern faces, jeweled crowns, proud mouths. As Elara passed them, she felt eyes follow her, not with threat, but with a hunger for a conclusion. At the far end stood a grand staircase, and at the foot of it sat a small table with a teacup already poured, steam still rising. Elara stopped short. You were expecting me. Alaric didn't deny it, his gaze fixed on the cup like it was evidence of a crime he couldn't erase. The castle set the table. It does that sometimes. That's impossible. It's old magic, he said. The kind people used to call blessings when it served them and curses when it didn't. Elara stared at the teacup. The steam smelled of honey and herbs, and it made her throat ache with the memory of being cared for. She didn't touch it. I don't understand, she said. If your family did this, why tell me? Why not just? She couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of being trapped, used, consumed by some ancient promise made her skin crawl. Alaric's eyes sharpened, not in anger, never anger, but in fierce, controlled sincerity. Because I won't let it happen again. There was something in that vow of his that rang like iron. He moved toward the staircase, then paused as if weighing whether he had the right to ask anything of her. I need to show you something, he said, and you have every reason not to trust me, but if you walk out of this room without seeing it, you'll be in more danger than you realize. Alara's voice came out thin. Danger from who? Alaric's lips pressed together. From the people who put that letter under your door, from the ones who smile in daylight and whisper prayers at night. Alara's mind flashed to the market, the priest who blessed the bread, the kindly magistrate who once gave her a coin and called her brave girl, faces that had seemed safe. Her stomach turned. Alaric started up the staircase, taking slow steps as if he didn't want to startle her into running. Elara followed at a distance, her hand grazing the banister. The wood was smooth, worn by countless hands. It felt strangely warm. They reached a corridor lit by wall candles that burned without smoke. The air changed here, cooler, carrying the scent of old paper and pressed flowers. Alaric stopped before a tall door made of pale wood, carved with a pattern of intertwined roses and thorns. He didn't touch the handle, he looked at Elara instead. "Oh, this door won't open for me," he said. "It never has." Elara frowned. Why? Because it was built for the one they took, he answered. For her descendants if the vow ever called them back. A sick understanding settled into Elara's bones, slow and heavy. My mother, she began. Alaric's voice softened, careful as a bandage. Your mother may have been closer to this than she ever told you, or she may have spent her whole life running from it. I don't know, but the castle knows you. Elara stared at the carved roses. Her heart beat so loudly she could feel it in her teeth. What's behind it? She asked. Alaric's eyes held hers, and for the first time, fear truly showed on his face, not fear of her, but fear for her. The truth, he said, and the proof that I've been trying to stop this for years. Elara lifted her hand toward the door. The wood looked ordinary, yet her fingertips tingled before she even touched it, as if the air itself recognized her skin. Behind them, somewhere deep in the castle, a soft chime sounded, gentle, almost polite, followed by the faint scrape of something heavy moving across stone. Alaric went still, his head tilted, listening like an animal hearing a storm before it arrives. We're not alone, he whispered. Elara's fingers hovered a breath away from the carved rose. What is that? She asked, her voice shaking despite her effort. Alaric's gaze flicked down the corridor toward the darkness beyond the candles. His shoulders rose, not to threaten but to shield. A servant, he said, and his voice turned bitter with shame. Not mine, the vows. The scrape came again, closer now, like something being dragged gently, patiently, as if it had all the time in the world. Elara's hand finally touched the door, and the wood, warm under her palm, began to unlock itself from the inside. The door opened on a breath of air that smelled like dried lavender and rain-soaked letters. It wasn't a secret room of treasure or weapons. It was a small, quiet chamber that felt like someone had tried to make grief livable. A single window faced the forest, its glass slightly warped with age. A quilt lay folded on a narrow bed. Candles sat in neat rows, unlit but cared for. And along the walls, hundreds of papers, pinned and stacked and tied with ribbon, were letters written in different hands, different years, all circling the same ache. Elara stepped inside as if the floor might vanish. Her fingertips skimmed a desk covered in ink stains, pressed flowers, and a worn children's book with a cracked spine. On the front page, in careful script, was a name that hit her like a remembered lullaby. Myra Valens. Her mother's name. Alara's mouth went dry. No, she never. She told me she grew up by the river. She told me. Her voice collapsed into silence. Her mother had told her many things. Some were true. Some were meant to keep her alive. Behind her, Alaric didn't enter. He stayed at the threshold, as if stepping into this room without permission would be another theft. I found this room years ago, he said, barely louder than the ticking clock somewhere in the walls. It was sealed to me. I could only look through the crack under the door like a child outside a church. When the castle finally let me in, I understood why it never wanted my family near it. Elara reached for the book and opened it, hands shaking. Tucked inside were 3 folded letters. The paper was thin with age, but the ink had been protected, as if the room itself refused to let these words fade. The first letter began with a line that made Elara's knees soften. My dearest Elara, if you are reading this, it means the vow has found you. Elara pressed a hand to her chest as though she could hold her heart in place. She wrote to me, she whispered, tears burning hot. She knew. Alaric's voice turned rough. She tried to break it. Elara kept reading. Her mother's words spilled out like the truth finally allowed to breathe. I lived in this castle for one winter when I was young. They called it an honor. They dressed me in silk, fed me sweet bread, spoke to me like I was precious. But I was only precious the way a key is precious to the people who want the door. The king then was not Alaric, it was his father. The vow demanded a girl who would renew the blessing. I didn't understand what that meant until I heard them speaking in the chapel at night. They didn't want my life. They wanted my future. They wanted my child and my child's child and everything after, bound here forever. Alara's vision blurred. She blinked hard and forced herself to continue. One night a boy found me crying in the library. He was pale and quiet and too kind to be raised by those people. His name was Alaric. He was not king yet, he was just lonely. Elara lifted her eyes to him. His face had gone still, the way a person goes still when their oldest wound is touched. Her mother's letter continued. He didn't promise me riches. He didn't promise me safety. He promised me something rarer, that he would not let them break me, even if it cost him everything. Elara inhaled shakily. The scrape in the corridor sounded again, closer now, almost at the candles. Alaric glanced over his shoulder toward the dark hall. Read the last letter, he urged, urgency kept gentle by sheer discipline. Please, it explains what's coming. Elara's fingers fumbled to the third letter. The wax seal on this one was different, not a crown, but a rose wrapped in thorns. Elara, listen to me. The vow is not a monster. It is a machine made of fear and tradition. People keep it alive because it benefits them. They will call it holy. They will call you chosen. They will tell you the castle needs you. But the only thing that can truly renew a kingdom is not sacrifice. It is mercy. Elara's throat tightened on the word mercy. She could almost hear her mother saying it out loud, the way she used to when Elara was sick. The final lines made Elara's hands go numb. If the vow finds you, do not run alone. Go to Alaric. He carries the guilt, but he also carries the cure. The vow's power is rooted in blood, but it can be undone by a freely given truth spoken at the altar. The truth is this: the first girl they took was not a stranger. She was part of the royal line hidden away to be used. The vow began as a lie, and a lie cannot stand when named. Elara stared at the paper, her mind trying to fit the pieces together. Part of the royal line, you mean the first girl was? A princess, Alaric said quietly, his voice full of shame that wasn't even his to carry. My great-aunt, they erased her name from history and called it protection. They used her as the foundation of the bargain, and every generation after they demanded someone like her, someone with the same blood thread diluted into ordinary lives. Alara's breath hitched. So my mother, me. He nodded once as if nodding hurt, a branch they never meant to lose. Elara backed away from the desk, the room swaying. Then the note, who sent it. The scrape stopped outside the door. A soft knock followed. Not harsh, not violent, almost polite, as if whatever stood there believed it had every right to enter. Alaric's eyes sharpened, and something ancient and protective rose in him, not a predator, but a guardian who had waited too long to be allowed to guard. Well, stay behind me, he said. Elara didn't move. She surprised herself by stepping forward instead toward the threshold. Courage didn't feel like fire. It felt like shaking hands that still reached for the doorknob. Alaric caught her wrist lightly, barely a touch, asking rather than forcing. His fingers were cool but not dead. There was life in him held tight under control. Elara, he said, pleading in a whisper, you don't owe this castle anything. She looked at him and saw it clearly. He had been living like a punishment in a crown. He could have ruled with fear, and yet he chose restraint so strict it looked like loneliness. He could have closed the gates forever, and yet he opened them for a girl he'd never met, because he recognized the shape of being used. And something inside Elara, something formed from years of scraping by without being seen, stood up straight. I owe my mother the truth, she said, and I owe myself the chance to end this. She eased her wrist from his hand and stepped into the corridor. The candles trembled as if the air had turned heavy. At the far end of the hall stood a figure in a long ceremonial robe, face hidden by a veil the color of dust. Not a monster, not a beast, just a person shaped into an instrument by belief. In its hands was a silver tray. On the tray lay another letter sealed with a crown. The veiled servant bowed, slow and precise like a ritual. Alaric's voice turned cold, not cruel but sharp with command. Who sent you? The servant did not answer. It extended the tray toward Elara. Elara's stomach churned. Every instinct screamed to step back, but her mother's letter echoed. People keep it alive because it benefits them. So Elara did the most dangerous thing an old lie can face. She spoke plainly. I'm not your offering, she said, voice trembling but clear. I'm not your key, I'm a person. The servant's hands faltered just slightly. Alaric inhaled as if surprised by the effect of that one sentence. He moved beside Elara, not in front of her this time. Beside her, shoulder to shoulder, as if sharing the weight was the only way to make it bearable. Tell your masters, Alaric said, his voice ringing down the corridor, that the vow ends tonight. The servant's veil shifted, and for the first time a pair of eyes showed through, human eyes, frightened and tired, not loyal, not proud, trapped. It whispered, barely audible, the altar is prepared. Alara's hands curled into fists. Good, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness, because we're going to use it for something else. They walked through the halls together, not running, not hiding. The castle seemed to sense the change in them. Candles brightened as they passed, doors opened without complaint, drafts turned warm as if guiding them forward. The building that had once felt like a mouth ready to close now felt like a witness eager to see justice. The chapel doors were carved with the same roses and thorns. Inside, moonlight spilled through high windows, painting the stone floor in silver. At the front stood an altar covered in embroidered cloth. Around it, the air hummed with the pressure of old words waiting to be spoken again. Elara stepped up, and the room seemed to lean toward her. She heard murmurs from behind the pillars, shadows of people not clearly seen but present. the ones Alaric had warned her about, daylight faces, nighttime intentions. Her voice tried to fail. Alaric didn't touch her, he didn't take her choice away by saving her. He only spoke low enough for her alone. "You are not alone," he said, "and you are not property." Elara nodded, swallowing hard. Then she faced the altar and lifted her mother's letter. "My name is Elara Valen," she said, voice echoing softly. "My mother was Myra Valen. She was taken here and lied to. She escaped so I could be born free." A hush fell so deep the candles stopped flickering. Elara continued, each word a step onto ground she had never been allowed to claim. "The vow began with a stolen princess," she said, and the room seemed to flinch at the truth. "They erased her name to make the theft look like a blessing, but a blessing doesn't need chains." A whisper of outrage moved in the shadows. Someone inhaled sharply, like the lie had been slapped. Alara's heart hammered, but she didn't stop. She looked directly at the darkness where the unseen listeners stood. "You want a sacrifice because sacrifice is easier than change," she said. "You want a girl to carry your fear so you don't have to, but I won't." Alaric stepped forward then, his presence filling the chapel not with threat, but with authority shaped by humility. "I am Alaric," he said, "king by inheritance, yes, but more importantly, responsible." That word landed like a stone dropped in water, heavy, honest, rippling outward. "My father maintained this vow because it protected his power," Alaric said, voice steady. "I maintained the silence because I believed my shame could atone for it. I was wrong." He reached into his coat and drew out a small, old signet ring, the royal crest. He held it up for the shadows to see. "I renounce the lie," he said. "I name the stolen princess as family, I restore her honor, and I return what was taken." The air changed, not like thunder, like a knot loosening. Elara felt it first in her lungs, as if she could breathe in a way she hadn't known she was missing. The chapel's coldness softened. The candle flames steadied into a warm, gentle glow. The veiled servant, standing near the aisle now, let out a shaky breath and sank to its knees, as if something inside it had finally been released from an order it couldn't disobey. A voice rose from the shadows, sharp with panic. "If the vow breaks, the blessing breaks, the kingdom will suffer." Alara's fear surged, then turned slowly into clarity. "Then we build something better than a blessing bought with stolen lives," she said. "We build it with work, with fairness, with truth." Silence again. This time it wasn't the silence of a trap. It was the silence of people hearing a new idea and realizing they can't unhear it. Alaric turned to Elara, and in his eyes she saw the thing he had hidden behind his crown, a deep, careful hope that he never dared to keep for himself. "You're free," he whispered. It sounded like he was saying it to both of them. Elara stared at him, tears sliding down her cheeks, and something unexpected happened. The fear she had carried into the castle didn't just vanish. It transformed. It became a strange, tender power, the power of someone who survives and then chooses to make survival mean something. The castle gave a low, settling sigh, like old stone releasing an old sorrow. Then from the altar cloth a small sealed envelope slid forward as if pushed by an unseen hand. No crown seal, no royal mark. Only a simple rose. Elara picked it up and broke the seal with careful fingers. Inside was a single line written in her mother's hand, ink slightly faded but sure. "If you ended it, my brave girl, then you get to choose what comes next." Alara's knees nearly buckled. She pressed the note to her heart and looked at Alaric. For the first time, he allowed himself to step closer, not to claim her, not to trap her, but to stand near her like a person who had finally learned the shape of peace. Outside the chapel windows, the first thin edge of dawn began to lighten the sky. Elara whispered, "What happens to you when the night stops owing you obedience?" Alaric's breath hitched. He looked toward the growing light, and the fear in his face wasn't fear of burning, not fear of pain. It was the fear of living without punishment. I don't know, he admitted, but I want to find out. Elara nodded through tears. Then we find out together. And as the dawn climbed higher, the castle's long-locked gates unlatched with a sound like a promise, leaving one quiet, aching question hanging in the brightening air. Was freedom the end of their story, or the beginning of a kingdom finally learning how to live?